Okay, a very good afternoon, evening to everyone. Welcome to a new series of Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, one of Shlomo's favorites. In fact, Pirkei Avot is very unique amongst the other tractates of the Talmud. Avot is actually a Mishnayot, and it's the only one which deals exclusively with the outlook of the Chachamim, with their lessons for life, the way they live their own lives, the morals and ethics they wish to impart to the future generations, to the students, and throughout history. So what I want to do today is just give a little bit of an overview of where this whole idea of studying Pirkei Avot in this period comes from, and really, why is it relevant to us? So just a little bit of background. We are now in the period after Pesach, between Pesach and Shavuot. How many weeks are there between Pesach and Shavuot? No? 7. Okay. How many chapters are there in Pirkei Avot? So the truth is, there's only 5 chapters, but there's actually 6 in the book. If you look at the book, there's 6. So there are 5 chapters of Mishnayot, and the last chapter, Mishnah Perek Vav, is actually a chapter which is made out of Braitot. Braitot is a later period after the Mishnah. Much same time, but doesn't have the same level as a Mishnah, if you want. And the reason why they did that, to make Pirkei Avot as a book, as a sefer, which is studied, is because the Pirkei Avot is actually supposed to be read between the weeks of Pesach and Shavuot. Now it's interesting because we just said that there's actually 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, and yet we said we only have 6. So what's the answer? So the answer is very simple, because in Pesach, you always have a Shabbat. So the first week after Pesach, either have a Chag or a Shabbat, you're not going to actually be reading Pirkei Avot. Hence, we only have 6 left from Pesach to Shavuot. So 6 Shabbatot, 6 Shabbats that we have between Pesach and Shavuot, and that is the time where we actually sit down to read Pirkei Avot. So where does this come from, this custom of reading Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot? So just a little bit of history. The oldest Siddur that we have today, anyone know? The oldest Siddur.
I bet it's from Damascus.
No, believe it or not. I was going to say, if you ask the Syrians.
Or Bukhara.
That's cheating. Oh, we got Des. Des is here. Des, welcome. Mazal Tov, very special Mazal Tov to Des. Occasion of the wedding of his daughter. Des, what's the oldest Siddur that we have today?
Is it something from the Geniza in the Cairo Geniza?
No, not from the Cairo Geniza. No, earlier than that. Earlier.
From the Sanhedrin?
Oh, so close. The earliest Siddur, printed Siddur or traditional Siddur that we have is a Siddur of Amram Gaon. Many of the original Nuschaot, the different types of texts, originate in the Siddur of Amram Gaon. Amram Gaon was the period of the Geonim. The Geonim was the period after the Amoraim. So at the time of the Mishnah was the Tanaim, time of the Gemara, later was the Amoraim, and then after that, circa second Bet HaMikdash, after the destruction, once the Gemara was closed, then there was the period of the Geonim. So this is...
It would have been out of Bavel.
Correct. So this is from Amram Gaon, and he says that the custom is to read Pirkei Avot between Mincha and Arvit every Shabbat throughout the year. This is not our custom, but that's what he says. And he says the reason is because the time that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, anybody know what day of the week Moshe Rabbeinu passed?
On Shabbat.
Good, Shabbat. What time on Shabbat? What part of the day?
The afternoon.
Excellent.
One.
Afternoon. Why? How do we know? Because on Shabbat we say tzidkatcha. Tzidkatcha tzedek leolam, which is basically tziduk hadin, where we accept the judgment of God for the death of the great tzaddikim, namely the greatest one, Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu died Shabbat afternoon, and that is one of the reasons why we say Pirkei Avot on Shabbat during Mincha, between Mincha and Arvit, is because of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away in the time of that period. And how's the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avot start? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe, who accepted to receive the Torah from Sinai, Yeshua gave the tradition to Joshua, to Zekanim, and Nevi'im, and etc., so on and so forth. And then we learn out the different tradition, the different breakdown of the different rabbis on how it kind of broke down till we have it today. Yes, yeah.
Two questions. When you said the oldest Mishnah, so we have actually
Oh, Sidur.
the Siddur from that time. How did they find it? Where is it? How did
Good question. I've never actually gone into the historical, where we got it, how it got passed down, and all that. I've actually never looked into it. I know they have the Sidur. It's in print today, but that is the earliest copy of a Sidur we have today.
And who wrote Pirkei Avot?
So Pirkei Avot is Mishnayot. Mishnah was compiled by Rabbeinu Yehuda Nasi, and then after that, the Gemara was put together over a period of 400 years on, like, basically backwards and forwards of understanding of rabbis throughout 400 years to understand what the Mishnah was. But Rabbi was the redactor of the Mishnah, and basically these Mishnayot were put together by Rabbi, and this is called Pirkei Avot, the classics of the fathers, and these chapters are read in the 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. Now, Rabbi Aaron McGowan says you do it the whole year, but the understanding of Rabbi McGowan is because we commemorate Moshe Rabbeinu's memory, essentially, because that's how we start off the Pirkei Avot, Moshe Kibel Torah miSinai. Now, we Sfaradim, we don't do that. We have the custom to actually read it specifically between these weeks, Pesach and Shavuot, hence the number 6, because there are 6 Shabbatot, 6 Shabbats between Pesach and Shavuot, and that is why we read Pirkei Avot during this period. Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the early Rishonim, one of the early periods, well over about 1,000 years ago, he says the following. He says, why specifically during this period between Pesach and Shavuot? He says, I'll tell you why. He says, because Pesach time, anybody read the Yale's message, is that Pesach is springtime. It's now beginning the summer months. And as the summer begins, what happens? The Yetzer Hara decides to come out and start with us a little bit. So it's really a time where we need the protection of Musar, of the study of Musar, the study of understanding the ethical morals and values. And that's why during this period specifically, we actually begin to read Pirkei Avot. The Midrash Shmuel, one of the great commentators on Pirkei Avot, he says the following. He says, the reason why we actually read Pirkei Avot during this period is because this period is what we know as the period of Sefirat HaOmer. Every night, we read, we count the Omer, the days between Pesach and Shavuot. And in this period, as we know, we don't shave our beards, we don't listen to music, we don't have weddings, we don't say Shechianu, because we are in a state of mourning. Mourning for whom?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
התלמידים של בן
בשביל מה
רבי
יוחד ל"ג בעומר? זה תלמידי רבי עקיבא. בשביל מה יוחד ל"ג בעומר זה we can commemorate.
24,000.
How much?
24,000.
Oh. So during this period, the Gemara says there were 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that passed away. As a result of this terrible tragedy, you can just imagine 24,000 Torah scholars passed away.
It was a mini pandemic.
Mini pandemic, exactly. But maybe not so many back in the day, because 24,000 students, I mean, can you imagine all the yeshivot today and all the seminaries today? You know, I don't know if we can get to that number yet. So this is really
I meant localized pandemic.
Correct. Before the pandemic started, nobody knew the word pandemic. Everybody knew epidemic, a local epidemic. Pandemic, world, global thing. And now it's like, everybody knows. But back in the day, it was a extreme catastrophe. Says the Midrash Shmuel, the reason why we read Pirkei Avot during this period, because it is the period of the time where we mourn the loss of the students of Rabbi Akiva. And when a person, Bar Minan, is in a state of mourning, the person's hearts are open. People's hearts are open. So that's the time we read these Mishnayot, which really kind of bring out the chizuk and the, how do you say chizuk in English? The
Strength.
the better word.
No,
Reinforcement.
Yeah, we want to reinforce. There's a better word. I can't remember the word.
Power, no.
We are
לחזק.
mechazek ourselves. We reinforce ourselves. We strengthen ourselves to be able to relive. Fortify. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We fortify the lessons that we need to learn from Pirkei Avot, and that is why we read it between Pesach and Shavuot, because it's the period of the Omer, and that's the time when they passed away. It's interesting to note that it's brought down that the Chachmei Tzorfat, the French, actually had a bit of a different custom. They had a custom to read Pirkei Avot not only between Pesach and Shavuot, but they used to read it from Pesach till Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, till the 17th of Tammuz, because the 17th of Tammuz is, why is 17th of Tammuz a special date in Jewish history? Says our local historian.
חורבן בית המקדש.
Not Churban, there was something,
the
What's the
גלות.
date?
the 17th of
That
Tammuz.
was the beginning of the siege.
Beginning of the Churban, exactly. It was the beginning of the siege, right?
Yeah.
Tisha B'Av was actual Churban, right? But what was the first major tragedy for the Jewish people?
10 tribes.
No. Before that?
המרגלים.
Before that?
Before המרגלים?
Yeah.
Oh, Egypt.
The exile.
In slavery in Egypt.
Tragedy. No, tragedy after they came out, after Sinai.
Golden calf.
Good.
Egel
And what
HaZahav?
happened to the golden calf?
Egel HaZahav?
What
No,
happened to the golden calf?
Broken tablets. The broken
Chazaku Baruch. Moshe Rabbeinu broke the tablets. What day did Moshe Rabbeinu break the tablets?
Okay.
17th of Tammuz. So if we're talking about a time where we're trying to kind of analyze and fortify and strengthen and get this Musar really crammed in, so there are those that have the custom to read it really the summer months, from Pesach until 17th Tammuz. But everyone, according to everyone, whether you do it the whole year, whether you do it till the 17th of Tammuz, or whether you just do it between Pesach and Shavuot for the 6 weeks, everyone does it between Pesach and Shavuot. Everyone reads Pirkei Avot through this period. In fact, the French, the Chachmei Tzorfat, didn't just read Pirkei Avot, they would actually spend time studying Pirkei Avot. And that's why traditionally, many people, almost every synagogue and every rabbi, gives a class sometime through the year, usually between Pesach and Shavuot, because this is the time where we try to analyze a little bit. We have longer days on Shabbat, there's a little bit longer time, we have longer afternoons, so we have time not just to read Pirkei Avot, but to try to actually analyze the words. What seems to be that we said there's two reasons why we read Pirkei Avot during this period. Reason number one, we said, was because it's in anticipation, preparation for Shavuot. So we want to kind of prepare for Kabbalat HaTorah. So in order to prepare appropriately, we have to know that Imen Derech Eretz and Torah. If there's no Derech Eretz, there's no Torah. So we have to know how to act properly. So it's a part of a package deal. So in order to prepare for the Torah, that is how we do it. And that's how we learn it and we read. In fact, we count Sfirat HaOmer, we anticipate every day, day by day, week by week, discussion whether it's a separate mitzvah every single day, or it's a separate mitzvah to count every week, a different time for a different class. But either way, we count towards, in anticipation, the great event of Shavuot, where we're going to receive the Torah. The Chinuch famously explains that really, when you're desperate for something, you should really count down, not count up. When you're anticipating a wedding, when you're anticipating something which you're very much looking forward to, you want to go on holiday. You're anticipating for when COVID is going to be finished. When are you going to get your vaccine? When are you going to be a free man? What happens? You say, 2 weeks time, 13 days, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. When it comes to Sfirat HaOmer, where we wait in bated breath, in anticipation for the days of Kabbalat HaTorah, where we'll receive the Torah, what's strange is we count up and not count down. Why is that? Says the Chinuch, because counting down, you're trying to get rid of the days. You don't want the days. If you can, you want your vacation. So the vacation's in 3 weeks' time. You wish vacation would be today. So if you didn't have to wait, it'd be even better. So really you're counting down because you don't want 13 days. You don't want 12 days. You don't want 11 days. Says the Chinuch, when it comes to Sfirat HaOmer is a process. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. You're counting up towards an event because each day is what's necessary to be able to build off the last day to get to the next stage. So you build the first part of the ladder, then the second part of the ladder, and the third part of the ladder, until you reach the top of the mountain and you get to Kabbalat HaTorah. It seems to be, according to the second reason, which we said, that it happens to be that this period is the period of the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. It almost seems that it's coincidental. Coincidentally, the students of Rabbi Akiva passed away in Sfirat HaOmer. And hence, the reason why we kind of decide to grab onto this period and say, you know what, this is a good time to actually read Pirkei Avot. But let's just look at the source of how the students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. So the Gemara in Yevamot, the Talmud in Yevamot says, yes, Shlomo?
No, I just wanted to say, I think you're going to get to that in a second, but it's why they passed away.
Oh, okay. Yep, 100%.
It's the lack of Musar.
Oh, so we're going to get there. So what is it? Okay, so let's just read the Gemara. The Gemara says in Yevamot as follows. There were 12,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't say 12,000, it says 12,000 pairs. 12,000 pairs is 24,000, right? It's very important. We'll see why later, why it's 12,000 pairs. It doesn't say 24,000. And Rabbi Akiva had these 24,000 students. And the Gemara says, V'kulam meitu beperek echad. And they all died in one period. Why? Says the Gemara, Mipnei shelo nahagu kavod ze lazeh. Because they didn't give, or they lacked sufficient respect between them and their friends, them and their fellows. Says the Gemara, V'haya ha'olam shamem. And the world was desolate. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came to his 5 students, and he found these 5 students, and he kind of rebuilt Torah from these 5 people. Who were they? Meir Balanes, Shimon Bar Yochai, Rudi Bar Ilai, so on and so forth. And the Gemara says, when was this period? The Kulam Meitu ben Pesach la'atzeret. The time when they actually died was between Pesach and Shavuot. Okay, it says 24,000 Talmidim, students, 24,000 students died between this period, between Pesach and Shavuot, and the reason why they die is because they didn't respect each other. Okay? Now, I've got two questions which I want to ask you. Very nice. So we commemorate this. We have a custom to grow our beard. We have a custom not to listen to music, at least not live instruments. We have a custom not to say Shechianu. We don't have weddings until Lag BaOmer. And all this period, why? To commemorate this period of Yemei Din, certain level of judgment, because of the students of Rabbi Akiva that passed away. Two questions. Question number one is, since when does lack of respect get you capital punishment? Don't respect someone? Wham! The guy's going to die. Seriously? Why is there such a severe punishment to the students of Rabbi Akiva that just because they didn't respect each other, they died? Question number two. Why do we actually commemorate this until today?
Mhm.
Now, it's very strange because we're not related to them. I mean, we don't know anyone who's specifically related to the students of Rabbi Akiva. In fact, we don't even commemorate the other rabbis who actually the Torah got restarted from, except for Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, which is Lag BaOmer, like I said before. But other than that, pretty much, we don't even actually know when most of their deaths actually occurred. Rabbi Akiva, we don't make a big halibaloo out of it. But yet the students make a big deal out of it. Now, guess what? They all died because they didn't seem to be the greatest tzaddikim that we know of. So why are we making such a big deal? What relevance does it have to us? Anyone?
Well, if you remember,
Go ahead.
if you remember something that was inappropriate or this kind of a punishment, then you be careful. So you're teaching not to repeat it.
Okay, so it was a immense tragedy. I agree with that, and it was something which was really. The Gemara says, "Vaya ha'olam shamem." The world was desolate from Torah. So you're right. I mean, I understand this. This was like a national tragedy. But seemingly, I mean, how much relevance does it have to you and me to be able to say, for the rest of the generation, this is a halacha that we keep certain halachot, and we keep this level of mourning. And in fact, according to Midrash Shmuel, that's the reason why we learn Pirkei Avot, because we're in a state of mourning and our hearts are open. So that's why we learn it now. Dave?
Well, I was just going to comment to your question that, we don't, since when does a person get the death penalty just because he doesn't respect somebody else?
Right.
And I know that the standard answer that we get to that question is that these guys were holding on such a unbelievably high level that their slightest slight against somebody else, the slightest insult to somebody else was treated very seriously, given the heights that they had risen to.
Which is an even stronger question, you're saying?
No, it's a less of a question. They were judged more seriously
You're saying
for the smaller infractions.
Right. You're saying someone who's such a high level is judged, as per his level, and
Right.
because the slightest,
Infraction.
infraction of direction, which is going the wrong way, that's where it becomes problematic. It's a bit like, when a person's riding a bike and smashes into someone, it's might fall on the floor, not going to happen much. Person's driving a car, they say the difference between driving 30 kilometers an hour and 50 kilometers an hour can kill a person, right? A person's driving a jet, a fighter, F-16, and he goes a little bit out, then he's just going way off, and it's so much worse. So
Exactly.
that's true, 100%. So, but the question is, to the level of capital punishment just because you didn't respect someone. I mean, it does seem somewhat extreme. And again, we're talking about someone which needs to relate to us. We're not talking about them. We're talking about us. How is it relevant to us, Shlomo?
No, I'm just thinking, could it be that לא נהגו כבוד זה בזה או אחד בשני, whatever the word is, זה לזה, could it be about unity and not about actual respect?
What do you mean?
That because it's such a, they've all been destroyed, 24,000 of them. I think Rabbi Akiva left with none.
Yeah.
And then he started with another, like you said, another few in Yavne.
Yeah.
So the fact that all of them and not some of them, it shows about a lack of unity about in the group, and not just the Chavutot.
Right. Right. As a bit of a broader picture, you're saying. And therefore what?
And therefore, because all of them have the same sort of misbehavior together, then they deserve to go. I mean, I don't really justify that myself. I'm thinking it's the lack of unity of the whole 24,000.
You're saying there's a bigger picture going on over here, because
yes,
it wasn't just a few individuals. This is such a large group, and they all died.
And it's exactly the wording, capital punishment, is the whole capital gone.
Right. Right.
It's not just a few selected ones.
Right. Yeah.
It can be seen also maybe the same idea of the wandering the desert. You have to get rid of a generation that doesn't really is the future. So I don't know what this.
But that you know what? You've just strengthened the question. Thank you, Eyal. That's actually a very nice point. We don't commemorate a period. I suppose you can't exactly commemorate the period of 40 years. We commemorate Tisha B'Av when the thing actually, when the decree was kind of solidified. And actually the custom is to have the 15th of Av is as a Yamim Tovim LiYisrael, Lo Hayu Yamim Tovim LiYisrael, Ke 15 B'Av and Yom Kippurim, because that was the day when they stopped dying. But again, there's not a full long period of such a national calamity, such a national tragedy, other than this. There must be some relevance of how it relates to us and why it was such a tragedy and what it means. So, of Aaron Kotler, one of the Rashi Yeshivot, one of the great rabbis of the previous generation, who really established Torah in America, he established the Lakewood Yeshiva. He says the following. He's got a very beautiful and very powerful idea, which I think is really relevant to all of us. He says as follows. He says, there was a breakdown in the transmission of the Torah. Who are these students? Moshe Kibel, how do we start off Pirkei Avot? Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Right? Umsara Yoshua. Not this Joshua? Joshua, the son of Moshe, the student of Moshe. ויהושע לזקנים, ישועת הזקנים, זקנים נביאים, to the prophets, ונביאים מסרוה לאנשי כנסת הגדולה. And they gave word to the members of the great assembly. הם אמרו שלושה דברים, so on and so forth. And as you go through Pirkei Avot, you see the breakdown in tradition. In fact, Rambam, Maimonides, in the beginning of his introduction to Mishneh Torah, has a breakdown of how Torah was transmitted from Moshe Rabbeinu until his time. And we can trace down until today. So we have the period of, and if we got till the Rambam, so we got from the Rambam till today, the Rishonim, the Acharonim, Rashi, the Rosh, Ramban, the Rashba, the Ra'aved, the Rivash, the Rashbash, all these great, tremendous Chachamim. Then it goes to the Achronim, the Shulchan Aruch, the Marikash, the Gaon Mivilna, the Chafetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, Ovadia Yosef, the Kavach Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, and so on and so forth, until today. I saw someone who saw the Ben Ish Chai, who was in Baghdad. I saw someone who saw the Chafetz Chaim. My Rav studied by the Chazon Ish, right? This is a transmission of Torah of real breakdown. In Christianity, if you look through it, there is a bit of a problem. I think there's an 80-year period which is unaccounted for. I think it's 80 years between Jesus and Paul, where they didn't overlap, and suddenly everything changes. suddenly, Jesus was very, very anti anybody else other than his group or the Jewish group, whatever you want to call it. And then suddenly there's some kind of change, and suddenly it's all inclusive. It's everyone. And there seems to be a machloket, there seems to be a bit of an argument, and there was a whole discussion. If you go into it, I'm not giving a class of Christianity now, but if you go into the breakdown, there seems to be a missing link somewhere. We also don't have this concept of someone coming out of behind the rock and saying, I had prophecy. There's none of that, like nobody else saw. There was Atem Re'item, there was 3 million people approximately at the foot of the mountain. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, we were all there. And we have a breakdown from Moshe until today. And that is the tradition, that is the breakdown. And it's very important that we have a Mesorah. Rabbi Akiva was one of these people who was part of the links of the golden chain. Rabbi Akiva's students was now going to be the next link of transmitting the torch of Torah to the next generation. The problem is that there was a flaw in the link. The students of Rabbi Akiva.
In the what? The flaw in the what?
In the link.
Oh, in the link.
In the transmission of Torah was now being flawed because the students of Rabbi Akiva lo nagu kavod zebaseh. What does that mean? The Mishnah in Perek Shishi, in the 6th Perek of Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah says, HaTorah niknet be'arba u'shmona dvarim. There are 48 qualities which people need to have, certain 48 character traits which one needs to have to achieve perfection in Torah. Go through a few of them. Anava, humility. Dikduk chaverim, people, talmidim. Just study Torah with other people. You can't just make it up yourself. Lev tov, a good heart. Ahavat haberiyot, love people. Mitrachek min hakavod, to run away from honor. The opposite of everything Western society stands for. Noseh be'ol im chavero, somebody else is suffering, we share the burden with someone else. And so on and so forth. There are 48 of them. At the end, chapter 6, Mishnah 6. Worthwhile to look up, definitely worthwhile something to go through. What happened was, the Torah that was being transmitted was chaser bishlemut. There was a missing part in the wholesomeness of Torah. In such a situation, God decided, I'd rather not have a Torah than to have a flawed Torah. I'd rather have a Torah which is only V'haya ha'olam shamem. The Torah was, the world was desolate from Torah. But I'd rather have a desolate world of Torah than an perfect Torah which would be transmitted. This is an incredible idea. Yes, Ian.
You can look at it from a different angle. These students, it's not their fault, it's their teacher's fault. 24,000 people make the same mistake. Somebody didn't teach them well. So I would say, if you want to look at that again from a different angle, look at the teachers. They failed, not the students.
Let's try and think. What is the most famous memra, the most famous line that Rabbi Akiva stood by? The whole Pirkei Avot. Carry on, finish.
אהבת לרעך כמוהו.
No, what's the end of the line of Rabbi Akiva? No. ואהבת לרעך כמוך, זה כלל גדול בתורה. That is Rabbi Akiva. That what? Why did he say that? Because there was a extreme imperfection in 24,000 of his students. I mean, just try and imagine, as a teacher, you spend your whole life. Don't forget, Rabbi Akiva started at a very late stage in life. Rabbi Akiva started at the age of 40. He didn't know Aleph Bet. He married Rachel, the whole story. And Rachel said, if you go to yeshiva, I'll marry you. his father-in-law, who was one of the biggest millionaires at the time, decided to disown him. And nevertheless, you think he came back with 12,000 Talmidim, and eventually he came back with 24,000 students. And they all died. I don't remember what age he was. But can you imagine what that does to the teacher? But that was the lesson. Kiva Omer, Ve'ahavta recha kamocha, love your fellow like yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the greatest lesson of all the Torah. Because his students didn't learn it, and there was an imperfection in the transmission of the Torah, and God wiped them out. Because imperfection of the Torah, you cannot give over the Torah in the level that is necessary, because any slight imperfection will take us haywire a few generations later.
What could have been the imperfection?
Oh, so let's talk about that.
And how do we know that?
Very good questions. So let's try and analyze that a little bit. So until now we said that there seems to be, originally we said the first reason why we read the Pirkei Avot in this period was because the anticipation and preparation for Kabbalat HaTorah, for receiving the Torah. And the second reason was the Midrash Shmuel that says that because now is the period between Pesach Shavuot where the students of Rebbe Akiva passed away. Which it doesn't necessarily seem to be that there's any connection between the two reasons. But says Rabbi Aaron Kotler, at a closer look, we see there's actually a very great connection between the two. And that is the anticipation and preparation which we have from Pesach till Shavuot, that we read this Pirkei Avot of how to perfect our character and our character traits and everything that the ethics of the Torah, is all in anticipation for the Torah. And it was exactly at that time, this period, that the students of Rebbe Akiva passed away. Why did they pass away? Because they didn't have the perfection required to transmit the Torah. And therefore we have to solidify that. And in order to be able to anticipate or to prepare appropriately for Shavuot, we have to make sure to perfect our character traits. That is what we're doing when we study Pirkei Avot. We're not just saying the words, we're studying Pirkei Avot. Shlomo.
Are you saying that it was a divine plan, or God decided that he's going to eliminate 24,000 because it's a bad link? That's basically what you're saying.
That's what Baron Kotler said, yeah.
In a short form.
That's right. Bad link, but what's the lesson from that? A bad link in Torah can take you haywire. So let's talk about Annie's point. So what was the bad link over here? So the Gemara says, Talmud, yes, Eyal?
If you want to go really extreme,
Mhm.
The victims of the Holocaust, right? Maybe they were also one of the problem of the links. No,
So when it comes to these sort of things, this is not for us to speak about, why someone died. We're not analyzing necessarily why someone died. We're talking about, first of all, you need to be a very great tzaddik and Talmid Chacham to point a finger and say, this is where there was a slight imperfection. I think Des put it beautifully before, that this is people at such a high level. It wasn't that they didn't like each other, right? Let's get this clear. Hold on a second. Let's get there 1 second. Let's just go through the breakdown. What did we say the reason was? The reason was because there was a breakdown in the Ben Adam Lechavero. Lo nagu kavod ze lazeh. They didn't respect each other. That means what comes out is in Torah, there's two parts. There's Ben Adam Lamakom, there's the halachic aspect, there's between us and God, and there's the Ben Adam Lechavero. And there's the interaction with people. One without the other is considered the flaw which the Torah's transmission will not be able to be given over if you have one without the other. So if you have someone who's a great scholar but has terrible midot, waste of time. You have someone who's incredibly midot but doesn't have a Torah, also not good. You need the combination of both to be able to have what we have the Torah of today.
Well, this puts the onus, just a minute. This puts the entire onus of transmitting the Torah on Rabbi Akiva. Surely he wasn't the only one. So to say that we are pretending to know the mind of God, that's a bit presumptuous on our part to say that we think we know the mind of God and we know that that's why he killed 24,000 people. That seems to me a bit, if I were to say that I know the mind of God, my God, I'll think that I'm arrogant.
You're saying, first of all, what you're saying is 100% correct. It's not for us to decide, we're not prophets, but we do have what the Talmud says. And the Talmud is tradition from that time. And the Talmud says that the reason why they died was Shalom Hagu Kavod Zebazeh. What Rabbi Aaron Kotler is trying to do is trying to analyze what these words mean in relation to the catastrophic tragedy which happened. We know one thing. We know there was a breakdown in the transmission. Rabbi Akiva, V'haya Olam Shamen, 24,000 students died, and Rabbi Akiva had to kind of start from scratch with the 5 students which we have the Torah from them. So that breakdown was because the Gemara says, the Talmud says, because of one line. Says Rabbi Aaron Kotler, what seems to be is, in terms of breakdown, why was there a breakdown? Because transmission without midot, Torah without midot doesn't work. Why we learn Pirkei Avot during this period is because this is the time where they died, and in anticipation and preparation for Kabbalat HaTorah, we have to work on our midot.
Yeah, but why did 24,000 individual human beings die? I mean, take it on head on, Rabbi, you're dancing. Why did they die? By the way, you're not a bad dancer, but you're dancing. Why?
So,
I think I mean, for my satisfaction, I know why, but I want you to
go on, fill us in. Sam, I think you're muted. So again, it's not for us to say reasons other than what we have tradition for, right? Annie's got a good point. We're not deciding, who, what, where. We have to analyze what the words of the Gemara mean. And when we say lo nagu kavod ze bazeh, that's what it means, that ben adam lechavero with Torah without ben adam lechavero doesn't work. Moshe kibel Torah misinai is only because we learn this period, all this, the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, and all the different midot, to be able to make ourselves better people in anticipation for the Torah.
Bye-bye.
There is a saying that says, Derech Eretz kadma laTorah. Derech Eretz is even more.
Pirkei Avot.
That's Pirkei Avot.
The Chazal, bidiyuk. So that demonstrates how important Derech Eretz here before the
100%. 100%. I'll give you an example. Give you one example, Shlomo. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Can anyone translate? No. For the first part. Moshe kibel Torah misinai.
Moshe received the Torah from Sinai.
God Moses.
Moshe received the Torah from Sinai.
Yeah.
Did he receive the Torah from Sinai?
No, from God.
Oh, he received the Torah at Sinai, Sinai, not me Sinai. First question all the Parshim asked. Shlomo? Okay.
No.
Every
true.
word, every letter.
No. I'm saying I said it as an exception.
Like, okay. No matshuva.
It was in Sinai, so he got it from, well, I don't know the answer.
He got it from God. He got it at Sinai. So either say Moshe kibel Torah me'Hashem, or say Moshe kibel Torah beSinai. But don't say Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai.
So why do we say that?
Oh, so the Parshim explain, the commentators explain. A simple answer. As the Batanura says. Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai means he received the Torah from the mountain. What does that mean? From the mountain of Sinai, as we know traditionally, was a small mountain. Gemara says that Torah was given on Sinai because the mountain of Sinai was a small mountain.
Insignificant mountain.
should be insignificant, because to be able to receive Torah, what do we say? One of the midot you have to have, one of the character traits, is to have anava.
But the sunrise is beautiful in the morning.
Sam has been there, as we know.
Not the same
but-
time, not the same Sinai.
Jabal Musa, no, it's not.
Nice
Wherever
Sinai
that
is a
is,
nice
we're
one.
not going to go up that street now. But
Not
bottom
so-
line is, Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. The humility Moshe Rabbeinu had to have was something which was the first thing before getting the Torah was what you said. Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. The Ben Adam Lechavero, the midot, the character trait, the refined character traits are part and parcel, and perhaps even before.
But what
First
did the
you mensch,
individuals do? What
and
did
then
the
everything
individuals
else.
do wrong? What did the individuals do? 24,000 people did something wrong. They didn't behave properly. And I'm not quite getting what their mistake was.
So you missed the beginning part of the class, but Des said that
I withdraw the question.
okay. So obviously to their level, we're not discussing exactly what it is,
That's okay.
but
No, that's cool.
what the Gemara says that Shalom. I want to discuss one last part in the last few minutes that we have. It's very interesting that we don't commemorate any of the other students' yortzites. We, in fact, I mentioned before, we don't even know the other students' dates other than most famous, perhaps, one of the most famous of the students is Shem Bar Yochai, Bishimon. Passed away like Ba'omer. I make a big deal out of it. And other than that, in fact, we don't even celebrate the yortzeit of Rebbe Akiva, the Rebbe, the Chacham of all these students, which is mind-boggling. In fact, I can tell you, we don't even necessarily know what date Rebbe Akiva passed away.
Isn't it?
Traditionally,
That's pretty easy to figure that one out, I think.
So, why?
Just like my father always used to say, it's Mother's Day, and I'd be going to get her a gift. He said, every day is your Mother's Day. Remember that.
But not every day did Rebbe Akiva die. The question is, what day did Rebbe Akiva die?
Every day he lived.
He lived, but he didn't die. So when do we talking about
Exactly.
celebrating the death over here, right? The Yotzei. We have a tradition that Rebbe Akiva passed away on, anyone?
Oh, he passed away during the rebellion.
I think he was one of the 10 martyrs of Asara Arugei Malchut, correct? He died al Kiddush Hashem.
After Bar Kochba or before?
After.
We know that
Afterwards.
That's why
around
I called
one-
Bar Kokhba, Bar Kaziva after.
But 135, 36.
yeah,
Dinner.
we have a tradition that the day that Yehuda Hanassi was born was the day that Rabbi Akiva passed away.
Okay, so when was Rebbe Hanassi born?
Well, as Ayal said, it was like 135 AD or something. So I don't know the exact date.
What day did the Jewish calendar?
Not
We know
eight.
about Ba'omer Shem Bar Yochai. We know that the students of Rebbe Akiva, 24,000 died between Pesach Shavuot. What day did their Rebbe die? We don't even have. That's not recorded. There is a tradition that he died on Yom Kippur, or Erev Yom Kippur. In fact, we Sfaradim, for those that like the additional anenus, anenu, know that?
Yeah.
So we have anenu,
בזכותי דבר יוחאי. בזכותי דבר יוחאי.
the Bar Yochai we have, בזכותי the Rebbe Akiva, הנהרג היום על קידושת שמך.
זה פעם ראשונה לשמם.
הנה. Okay? So
אתה לומד משהו כל יום.
לומדים משהו חדש כל יום. That is what one of the, if you look at some machzorim, they have this, that there's that what? Today Rebbe Akiva died on Yom Kippur. And we remember that. And that's why some have the custom, also the Ashkenazim, we don't, Sfaradim only say on Tisha B'Av. The Ashkenazim actually read the piyut of the Asara Rugei Malchut. Why? Because that was the day Rabbi Akiva died. But either way, in fact, I just tell you historically that there was a tradition that the Romans decreed that there should be no eulogies for Rabbi Akiva. And you can imagine that the people felt terrible. The great Rabbi Akiva.
He was considered a traitor by the Romans because he encouraged Bar Kokhba, and
Right.
that
Yeah,
was a
100%.
disaster.
But
I was thinking maybe that's the reason why nobody discusses his yortzeit, because
But he said he made a mistake. He said he made a mistake.
because that's right, it was a terrible mistake because
was
of Bar
Mashiach.
Kokhba, because of Bar Kokhba, so many more. The biggest
People died.
slaughter was after Bar Kokhba of the Jews.
Yeah,
we don't remember Rabbi Akiva for the bad things that he did or the mistakes that he did. We remember Rabbi Akiva for Rabbi Akiva, who was Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Gemara says, when he was going to receive the Torah from God, he says, why are you asking me to give the Torah to the Jewish people? You have Rabbi Akiva in a few generations' time, who's so much greater than me. Can you imagine Moshe Rabbeinu says that?
wow.
No, I can't imagine he said
So
how
how can it be? So what's going on? So back to the tradition says that he passed away on Erev Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur, and they didn't know what to do. So they weren't allowed to eulogize. So they went around the Bet Knesset with the Sefer Torah, called Nidre, and everyone went around kissing the Sefer Torah. It wasn't COVID then. And they went around the synagogue saying, Or Zarua la Tzadik ul Yishre lev Simcha. Which Tzadik? Referring to Rabbi Akiva. In fact, if you look at the Sofet Tevot, the last letters of each one of those words, Or Zarua la Tzadik ul Yishre lev Simcha, the Otiyot, last letters, is Rabbi Akiva. Or Resh. Zarua Ain, Tzadik is Kuf, ul Yishre Yud, Lev Bet, Simcha Hey. Rabbi Akiva. Because they couldn't eulogize him, so they said that. Either way, what is the bottom line? The bottom line is we don't have Rabbi Akiva at the outside. We don't have any of the students of Rabbi Akiva who actually rebuilt the Torah, but we do have the outside of reading Pirkei Avot between Pesach Shavuot of the students who weren't necessarily the good guys. Yes.
But Annie said something true. The rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, was not something that the big Chachamim approved. And Rabbi Akiva and Shimon and Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Akiva led to the destruction.
Yeah, the uprising. Look, so that's a separate history lesson which we have to go through. Exactly how Rabbi Akiva could have made such a mistake. That's a separate discussion. So it's actually a very interesting thing, and
it caused a terrible disaster. Caused a terrible disaster to the Jewish people.
Every time through Jewish history, every time there was an imposter or there was a person who they thought was Mashiach, and it wasn't, the high which they went through resulted in such a low that caused devastation amongst Jewish people. The classic example is Shabtai Tzvi. Right? The devastation it caused the Jewish nation across the world was beyond tragic. But that's a class for another time. Just want to finish in the last 2 minutes where we want to get to. If we analyze the issue of what it was, that we make such a big deal, and we read Pirkei Avot during this period, it's not because, like what Des said before, Lo nagu kavod bazeh bazeh does not mean they hated each other. They didn't respect each other. It does not mean necessarily they were, horrible behavior towards each other. It doesn't even mean they weren't friends to each other. How do I know? Shlomo, this is to your point. Because it doesn't say there were 24,000 students. It says there were 12,000 pairs of students. They were best friends. But lo nahagu kavod zeh bazeh. The lesson of the Yemei Sfirah, the reason why we read Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot, is not for nothing. It's a two-part package. It's that there are character traits which have to be worked on. There's the Ben Adam LaMakom and there's Ben Adam LaChavero. There's the midot which we have to work on, and if we don't work on those midot and we try to continue the Torah, receive the Torah, it's a flawed Torah. And God said, I'd rather not have a transmission of a flawed Torah I'd rather have nothing. V'haya olam shamim. But Torah has to be given over as a whole. And that is our job. And that is why we make such a big deal out of the students of Rebbe Akiva, which seemingly has no relevance to us. And capital punishment? Yes. The answer is because we cannot have Torah which is flawed. And Torah without midot cannot be. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. The reason why we have Pirkei Avot is the two reasons together. It's not a coincidence. Number one, it's in preparation for Kabbalat Torah. And number two is because this period, the students of Rebbe Akiva weren't able to really work on themselves, work on the midot. And we could just look around us. We all know what it means, how ugly it is when you see people who act inappropriate, when we see people who don't have able to work on midot. In fact, the whole Musa movement of Rabbi Israel Salanta started, and I'll finish with this, with I think a story, something along the lines, there was a shoemaker, and the shoemaker was very poor, eventually became very wealthy. He made a huge wedding, his daughter's wedding, and there was one guy, he really wanted to jab him. So on the way to the chuppah, he goes up to the father of the bride, it's a huge wedding, hundreds of thousands of people, and he knocks him on the shoulder, he says, tell me, how much would it cost to repair these pair of shoes? The guy had a flipped, heart attack, whatever it was, and that's when Israel Salanta said, such shchitut in midot, such midot, ra'ot, such bad midot, where in the time of the daughter's wedding, that's when you want to take him down. That is the climax or the epitome of bad midot. And that is why he started the Musar movement. And that's really what Pirkei Avot is. Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, the fundamentals of who we are and what lies behind everything we do, that is Pirkei Avot, like Ani said before, ki derech eretz kadma Torah. Thank you, everyone.
Kol toda rabba.
חזק וברוך.
Rabbi,
Toda, Rabbi.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'll speak to you next time. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everyone.